I stood at the kitchen counter, chopping onions for my signature beef stew, when Josie burst through the front door. Her face was flushed, eyes wild with a mix of anger and something else I couldn't quite place. "Mom, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling. I set down the knife, wiping my hands on my apron. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Josie paced the kitchen, her hands clenched into fists. "I saw Dad today. He was with Claudia." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, with Claudia?" "They were at the mall, holding hands. I saw them, kissing." Josie's voice cracked on the last word. The room started to spin. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. "Are you sure it was them?" Josie nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm positive, Mom. I'm so sorry." I took a deep breath, trying to process this bombshell. Steve and Claudia, my husband and my best friend? It couldn't be true. But Josie wouldn't lie about something like this. "Did they see you?" I asked, my mind racing. "No, I don't think so. I ran out of there as fast as I could." I pulled Josie into a hug, feeling her body shake with sobs. "It's okay, sweetie. We'll figure this out." Just then, the front door opened again. Jesse walked in, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He took one look at us and froze. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. I released Josie and turned to face my son. "Jesse, we need to talk. All of us." We gathered around the kitchen table, the beef stew forgotten. I explained what Josie had seen, watching Jesse's face darken with each word. "I'll kill him," Jesse growled, his hands balling into fists. "No, you won't," I said firmly. "We need to handle this like adults." "But Mom," Josie interjected, "what are you going to do?" I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. "First, I need to talk to your father. We need to hear his side of the story." "His side?" Jesse scoffed. "What side could possibly justify cheating on you?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I owe it to our family to at least hear him out before making any decisions." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made us all freeze. Steve was home. "Kids, go to your rooms," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to talk to your father alone." Josie and Jesse exchanged worried glances, but did as I asked. As they climbed the stairs, I heard the front door open. "Laura?" Steve called out. "Something smells good." I stood up, smoothing down my apron. My hands were shaking, but I clenched them into fists at my sides. Steve walked into the kitchen, a smile on his face that quickly faded when he saw my expression. "What's wrong?" I looked at him, this man I'd loved for over 20 years, and felt my heart breaking. "We need to talk, Steve. Josie saw you today, with Claudia." The color drained from his face. "Laura, I can explain." "Can you?" I interrupted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can you explain why our daughter had to see her father kissing another woman? Can you explain why you'd betray me with my best friend?" Steve's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. In that moment of silence, I heard the muffled sobs of Josie from upstairs and Jesse's attempts to comfort her. I took a step closer to Steve, my voice low and dangerous. "You have one chance to tell me the truth, Steve. One chance to save this family. What's it going to be?" As I stared into his eyes, searching for any sign of the man I married, I realized that no matter what he said next, nothing would ever be the same again. Our perfect little family was shattered, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. I couldn't sleep that night. Steve's weak explanations and half-hearted apologies echoed in my head. By morning, I was a mess of anger and hurt, determined to see the truth for myself. I drove to Claudia's house, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. As I turned onto her street, my heart stopped. There was Steve's car, parked right in front of her house. I pulled over, my vision blurring with tears. How could he do this? How could they both betray me like this? My phone buzzed. It was Jesse. "Mom, where are you? Are you okay?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "I'm fine, honey. I just needed to run an errand." "You don't sound fine. I'm coming to get you." "No, Jesse, But he had already hung up. I sat there, staring at Claudia's house, willing myself not to march up to the door and confront them both. 20 minutes later, Jesse's beat-up Corolla pulled up behind me. He got out and tapped on my window. I rolled it down, avoiding his eyes. "How did you find me?" "Find my iPhone," he said, his voice tight. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I gestured weakly at Steve's car. Jesse's face darkened as he understood. "Let's go home," he said, opening my door. "You shouldn't be here." As I got out, the front door of Claudia's house opened. Steve stepped out, laughing at something behind him. When he turned and saw us, the laughter died on his lips. Laura? Jesse? He looked between us, confusion and guilt warring on his face. Jesse stepped forward, his fists clenched. How could you, Dad? How could you do this to Mom? Steve held up his hands. Son, it's complicated. You don't understand. I understand plenty, Jesse spat. I understand that you're a lying, cheating. Jesse, stop, I said, grabbing his arm. This isn't helping. Claudia appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Laura, I'm so sorry. We never meant for this to happen. I laughed bitterly. Never meant for what to happen, Claudia? For me to find out? For my children to see their father destroy our family? Steve took a step toward us. Laura, please, let's talk about this. Not here. Not like this. No, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. We're done talking, Steve. We're done with all of it. I turned to Jesse. Let's go home. As we drove away, Jesse glanced at me. Mom, what are we going to do? I stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of our neighborhood blur past. I don't know, honey, but we'll figure it out together. When we got home, Josie was waiting on the porch. One look at our faces told her everything. It's true, isn't it? She asked, her voice small. Dad's really leaving us for her. I pulled both my children into a tight hug, feeling their bodies shake with silent sobs. I don't know what your father's going to do, I said. But I know that the three of us are going to be okay. We have each other, and that's what matters. We went inside, and I made us all some tea. As we sat around the kitchen table, I looked at my children's tear-stained faces and felt a fierce protectiveness wash over me. I want you both to listen to me, I said. What your father did was wrong. It's going to hurt for a long time, but we are not going to let this break us. We are stronger than that. Jesse nodded, his jaw set. What do you need us to do, Mom? I reached out and squeezed his hand. Just be yourselves. Focus on school, on your friends. I'll handle everything else. Josie wiped her eyes. But what about you, Mom? Who's going to take care of you? I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest despite everything. We'll take care of each other. That's what family does. As we sat there sipping our tea and making plans for the future, I felt a strange mix of sadness and hope. Our lives had been turned upside down, but we were still standing. And no matter what Steve or Claudia or anyone else threw at us, we would face it together. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the front door slamming. Steve was home. I steeled myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. I found him in the kitchen, slumped at the table, his head in his hands. He looked up as I entered, his eyes bloodshot and weary. Laura, he said, his voice hoarse. We need to talk. I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hands steady despite the turmoil inside. Yes, we do. Steve took a deep breath. I'm sorry, I know that doesn't begin to cover it, but I am. What I did, it was unforgivable. You're right, I said, my voice cold. It was. He flinched at my tone. I want to make this right. Tell me what I need to do. I laughed bitterly. Make it right? Steve, you can't just fix this with an apology and some flowers. You destroyed our family. I know, he said, his voice breaking, but I want to try. For the kids, if nothing else. I set my coffee cup down hard, liquid sloshing over the rim. Don't you dare use our children as an excuse. You should have thought about them before you started sleeping with my best friend. Steve's face crumpled. Laura, please. I made a mistake, a terrible, awful mistake. But I love you. I love our family. If you loved us, you wouldn't have done this, I spat. He stood up, reaching for me. I stepped back out of his reach. Don't touch me, I hissed. Steve's hand fell to his side. For he looked defeated, lost. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. What do you want, Steve? I asked, suddenly tired. Why are you really here? He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. I want a divorce. The words hit me like a physical blow. Even after everything, I hadn't expected this. A divorce? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. Steve nodded, not meeting my eyes. I think it's for the best, for all of us. I felt the room spinning. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. You want to leave me for her, for Claudia. It's not like that, Steve protested weakly. Then what is it like? I demanded, my voice rising. Explain it to me, Steve. Explain how you can throw away 20 years of marriage, 2 children, everything we've built together for what? A fling with a woman who wears too much perfume and maxes out her credit cards? Steve's face hardened. Don't talk about her like that. You don't know her. And you do? I laughed, the sound harsh and brittle. Let me guess, she understands you in a way I never could. She makes you feel young again. Is that it? Stop it, Laura, Steve said, his voice low and dangerous. No, you stop it, I shot back. You don't get to waltz in here and demand a divorce like you're asking for a cup of sugar. You don't get to destroy our lives and then act like you're the victim. Just then, Josie appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Mom, Dad, what's going on? Steve's expression softened. Josie, honey, go back to your room. Your mom and I are just talking. No, I said firmly. She deserves to know. Your father wants a divorce, Josie. He's leaving us for Claudia. Josie's eyes filled with tears. Dad, is that true? Steve looked stricken. Josie, it's complicated. I never meant to hurt anyone. But you did, Josie said, her voice breaking. You hurt all of us. She turned and ran upstairs. We heard her door slam shut. Steve moved to follow her, but I blocked his path. Leave her alone. You've done enough damage. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Laura, please, we can work this out. We can go to counseling, take some time apart, anything but this. I shook my head, feeling a strange calm settle over me. No, Steve, you wanted a divorce. You've got one. Now get out of my house. As I watched him leave, I felt a mix of grief and determination wash over me. Our life together was over, but I had 2 children who needed me. No matter what it took, I would protect them and give them the stability they deserved. Steve may have given up on our family, but I never would. I stood on Steve's parents' doorstep, my heart pounding. I'd always gotten along well with Martha and George, but this visit felt different, dangerous even. Still, I needed to try. For the kids' sake, if nothing else. Martha answered the door, her smile fading as she saw me. Laura, what are you doing here? I took a deep breath. We need to talk, Martha, about Steve. Talk? She hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. George was in the living room, watching golf. He muted the TV as I entered. What's this about, Laura? He asked, his voice gruff. I sat down, clasping my hands tightly in my lap. Steve and I are getting a divorce. He's been having an affair with Claudia. The silence that followed was deafening. Martha's face paled, while George's reddened. That can't be right, Martha said finally. There must be some mistake. I shook my head. I'm afraid not. Josie saw them together, and Steve admitted it to me himself. George leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. And what did you do to drive him to this, Laura? I recoiled as if I'd been slapped. Excuse me, George, Martha exclaimed, but he waved her off. No, I want to know, he pressed. Steve's a good man. He wouldn't do this without reason. I felt anger bubbling up inside me. Without reason. There is no reason good enough to justify what he's done. Martha sat down beside me, her face a mask of concern. Laura, dear, maybe if you'd been more attentive to Steve's needs. My needs? I interrupted, incredulous. What about my needs? What about our children's needs? George scoffed. Don't bring the kids into this. They'll be fine. Kids are resilient. I stood up, my hands shaking. Resilient? Do you have any idea what this is doing to them? Josie cries herself to sleep every night. Jessie's barely speaking to anyone. Well, maybe if you hadn't turned them against their father, Martha began. I didn't turn anyone against Steve, I snapped. He did that all on his own when he decided to throw away our family for a fling with Claudia. George stood up, towering over me. Now listen here, young lady. I won't have you coming into our home and speaking ill of our son. I refused to back down. Your son destroyed our family. He's abandoning his children for a woman who cares more about her designer handbags than anyone else. Martha gasped. How dare you speak about Claudia that way? She's a lovely woman. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. You knew, I whispered, looking between them. You knew about the affair, didn't you? Their silence was all the confirmation I needed. How long? I demanded. How long have you known? George looked away. That's not important. It is to me, I shouted. How long have you been lying to my face, pretending everything was fine? Martha stood up, wringing her hands. Laura, please try to understand. Steve was unhappy. Claudia makes him happy. I felt like I was going to be sick. And what about me? What about my happiness? What about our children's happiness? Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good, George said solemnly. I stared at them, these people I'd considered family for over 2 decades. The greater good? Is that what you call destroying a family? Martha reached out to touch my arm. I jerked away. Don't, I said, my voice cold. Don't you dare try to comfort me now. You're as much to blame for this as Steve is. I headed for the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. I came here hoping for support, for some semblance of family. I see now that was a mistake. You're not my family. You never were. As I walked out, I heard Martha call after me, but I didn't turn back. My mind was racing, piecing together all the times Steve had visited his parents alone, all the knowing looks and hushed conversations. I got into my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I'd come here looking for peace, for a way to salvage something from this mess. Instead, I'd found more betrayal, more pain. As I drove home, I made a decision. No more olive branches, no more attempts at reconciliation. From now on, I was fighting for myself and my children, and God help anyone who stood in my way. I was elbow deep in soapy water, scrubbing dishes with more force than necessary, when the front door slammed open. Steve stormed into the kitchen, his face a thundercloud of rage. "You went to my parents," he shouted, not bothering with a greeting. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands, trying to stay calm. "Yes, I did. How dare you?" Steve's voice rose. "You had no right to drag them into this." I felt my own anger rising to match his. "No right? They're my children's grandparents. I thought they deserved to know what was happening to their family." Steve laughed bitterly. "Family? Is that what you call this? You've turned everyone against me." "I didn't turn anyone against you, Steve," I said, my voice steady. "You did that all on your own when you decided to cheat on me with my best friend." He slammed his fist on the counter, making me flinch. "Don't you dare bring Claudia into this." "Why not?" I shot back. "She's as much a part of this mess as you are." Steve's face contorted with anger. "This is exactly why I want a divorce. You're always playing the victim, never taking any responsibility for your part in this." I felt like I'd been slapped. My part? What part did I play in your decision to betray our marriage vows? "You were never there for me," Steve shouted. "Always too busy with the kids, with your hobbies, with everything but me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I was raising our children, Steve. Someone had to be there for them while you were working late nights and weekends." "Don't act like you're the only one who sacrificed," he spat. "I gave up my dreams to provide for this family." "And that gives you the right to throw it all away?" I asked, incredulous. Before Steve could respond, we heard a gasp from the doorway. Josie stood there, her eyes wide with shock and hurt. "Josie," Steve said, his voice softening. "Honey, I'm sorry. We didn't mean for you to hear that." Josie shook her head, backing away. "How could you say those things, Dad? How could you blame Mom for what you did?" Steve reached out to her, but she turned and ran upstairs. We heard her door slam shut. The fight seemed to drain out of Steve. He slumped against the counter, suddenly looking old and tired. "This is why I didn't want to involve the kids," he said quietly. I felt a surge of protective anger. "They're already involved, Steve. They're living this nightmare right along with us." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Can't we try to make this work? For their sake?" For a moment, I almost wavered. Then I remembered the look on Josie's face, the pain in Jesse's eyes when he found out about the affair. "No," I said firmly. "We can't. It's too late for that." Steve's face hardened. "Fine. If that's how you want it, we'll do this the hard way. I'm calling my lawyer in the morning." As he turned to leave, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. "Steve," I called after him. He paused at the door, not turning around. "I want you out of the house by the end of the week," I said. "The kids and we need space to heal." Steve's shoulders slumped, but he nodded. Without another word, he left. I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, my mind racing. This was it. There was no going back now. We were really getting a divorce. I heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to see Jesse and Josie standing in the doorway, holding hands. Their faces were a mix of fear and determination. "Mom?" Jesse said softly. "What happens now?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. "Now, we fight, for our family, for our future. It won't be easy, but we'll do it together." As I looked at my children's faces, I knew I had made the right decision. No matter what Steve or his parents or anyone else threw at us, we would face it as a team. And somehow, someway, we would come out stronger on the other side. The law office felt cold and impersonal as I sat across from my attorney, Sarah. She shuffled through a stack of papers, her face grim. "Laura, I won't sugarcoat this," she said. "Steve's playing hardball. He's going for full custody of the kids and wants to sell the house." My stomach dropped. "He can't do that, can he?" Sarah sighed. He's claiming you're an unfit mother, citing your emotional instability since the separation. I felt the room spin. Emotional instability? I'm not the one who threw away our marriage for an affair. I know, Laura, Sarah said, her voice softening, but we need to be prepared. This is going to be a tough fight. As I left the office, my phone buzzed. It was my new boss at the bakery. Laura, I need you to come in. We're short-staffed. I glanced at my watch. Josie's parent-teacher conference was in an hour. I can't. I have a commitment with my daughter. Look, he said, his voice sharp. I know you're going through a rough time, but I need reliable employees. If you can't make it, don't bother coming back. I felt tears pricking my eyes. I'll be there, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I called Josie, my heart heavy. Honey, I'm so sorry. I can't make the conference. Work emergency. The silence on the other end was deafening. It's fine, Josie finally said, her voice flat. Dad said he'd go anyway. My blood ran cold. Your father's going? Yeah, Josie said. He called this morning, said he wanted to be more involved. I ended the call, my mind racing. Steve hadn't been to a school event in years. Why now? With a sinking feeling, I realized this was part of his strategy. Painting himself as the involved parent while I was too busy working to show up. The bakery was chaos when I arrived. I threw myself into the work, trying to lose myself in the rhythm of kneading dough and decorating cakes. But my mind kept wandering to Josie, to Steve sitting in that conference, charming her teachers. As I was closing up, my phone rang again. It was Jesse. Mom, he said, his voice tight with anger. Dad's here. He's packing up his stuff. And he's taking some of our things, too. I felt a surge of panic. What? Jesse, don't let him take anything of yours or Josie's. I'm trying, Mom, Jesse said, his voice cracking. But he says as long as he's paying child support, he has a right to it. He took your recipe book, the one with Grandma's beef stew recipe. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. That book was my most prized possession, filled with generations of family recipes. I'll be right there, I said, already running for my car. I broke every speed limit on the way home, my heart pounding. When I pulled into the driveway, Steve was loading boxes into his car. What the hell do you think you're doing? I shouted, slamming my car door. Steve turned, his face a mask of cold determination. Taking what's rightfully mine, Laura. You can't keep everything. I marched up to him, fury coursing through my veins. Give me back my recipe book, now. He smirked, holding it just out of reach. Oh, this old thing? I thought I'd give it to Claudia. She's always wanted to learn how to cook. Something inside me snapped. I lunged for the book, but Steve was quicker. He tossed it into his car and slammed the door shut. You can't do this, I said, my voice breaking. That's my family history, Steve. It's all I have left of my grandmother. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I used to love in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by cold indifference. You should have thought of that before you turned the kids against me, he said, getting into his car. As he drove away, I sank to my knees on the driveway, feeling utterly defeated. How had it come to this? How had the man I'd loved for 20 years become this stranger who seemed bent on destroying me? I felt a hand on my shoulder and looked up to see Jesse and Josie standing there, their faces a mix of anger and concern. Mom, Jesse said softly, what are we going to do? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stand. We're going to fight, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Whatever it takes, we're going to fight. As we walked back into the house, I knew we were facing our toughest battle yet. But looking at my children, I also knew I had no choice but to win. For their sake and for mine. The phone rang, piercing the quiet of the kitchen. I glanced at the caller ID and froze. Steve. Hello, I answered, my voice wary. Laura, we need to talk, Steve said, his tone uncharacteristically subdued. Can we meet? My heart raced. After weeks of bitter legal battles and emotional turmoil, what could he possibly want? I don't think that's a good idea, Steve, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Please, Laura, it's important for the kids' sake. I closed my eyes, weighing my options. Finally, I agreed to meet him at a neutral location, the park where we used to take the kids when they were little. As I drove there, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, hurt, and a tiny, traitorous spark of hope that I couldn't quite extinguish. Steve was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. As I approached, he stood up, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. Laura, he said, his voice cracking. Thank you for coming. I sat down, maintaining a safe distance between us. What do you want, Steve? He took a deep breath. I've made a terrible mistake. I want to come home. I want us to be a family again. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. What? Claudia and I, it's over, he continued. It was never real. You and the kids, you're my real family. I was a fool to throw that away. I stared at him, speechless. Part of me wanted to laugh hysterically, while another part wanted to scream. Steve, I finally managed, you can't be serious. After everything you've done, everything you've put us through, you think you can just come back? He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I know I've hurt you, Laura. I know I've hurt the kids, but I want to make it right. I'll do anything. Therapy, whatever it takes. I stood up, needing to put physical distance between us. And what about the custody battle? The house? My recipe book? Steve had the grace to look ashamed. I'll drop everything, the lawyers, the custody fight, all of it. I just want my family back. For a moment, I let myself imagine it, going back to our old life, pretending none of this had happened. But then I remembered the pain in Josie's eyes, the anger in Jesse's voice, the nights I'd spent crying myself to sleep. No, I said, my voice firm. No, Steve, we can't go back. You destroyed that the moment you chose Claudia over us. His face crumpled. Laura, please, I love you. I love our children. If you loved us, I said, feeling a strange calm wash over me, you wouldn't have betrayed us in the first place. Just then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jesse. Mom, where are you? The bakery called. They need you ASAP or you'll lose your job. Reality came crashing back. I had responsibilities, a life I'd built without Steve. I couldn't throw that away on a whim. I have to go, I said, turning away. Steve grabbed my arm. Laura, wait, don't do this. Don't throw away 20 years of marriage. I yanked my arm free, fury rising in me. I didn't throw it away, Steve. You did, and now you have to live with the consequences. As I walked away, Steve called after me, his voice desperate. What about the kids? Don't they deserve a chance to have their family back? I stopped, turning to face him one last time. Our kids deserve parents who respect themselves and each other. They deserve stability and love, not broken promises and shattered trust. With that, I got in my car and drove away, leaving Steve standing alone in the park where we'd once been happy. As I raced to the bakery, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Had I made the right choice? Was I denying my children a chance at having their father back? But then I remembered the strength I'd found in myself, the resilience I'd seen in Jesse and Josie. We'd been through hell, but we'd survived. We'd built a new life, a stronger family unit. I pulled into the bakery parking lot, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. We would face them together, without Steve. Our family might be smaller now, but it was unbreakable. As I walked into the bakery, ready to fight for my job and our future, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in months, I knew without a doubt that I had made the right decision. The day of Jesse's college graduation dawned bright and clear. As I stood in the kitchen preparing a special breakfast, I couldn't help but marvel at how far we'd come. The doorbell rang and my heart skipped a beat. I knew who it was. I'll get it, Jesse called from the living room. I heard muffled voices, then Jesse appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face a mix of emotions. Mom, Dad's here. He wants to talk to all of us. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Okay, let's hear what he has to say. We gathered in the living room, Josie perched on the arm of my chair, Jesse standing protectively nearby. Steve sat across from us, looking uncomfortable in his suit. I know I have no right to be here, Steve began, his voice shaky, but I couldn't miss Jesse's graduation, and I wanted to apologize to all of you. I felt Josie stiffen beside me while Jesse's face remained impassive. Steve continued, I've been selfish and stupid. I threw away the best thing in my life for nothing. Claudia left me. My parents barely speak to me. I've lost everything. That's not our problem, Dad, Jesse said, his voice cold. You made your choices. Steve nodded, his eyes filling with tears. I know, and I'll regret those choices for the rest of my life. But I was hoping maybe we could start over? Be a family again? I felt a surge of anger, remembering all the pain we'd endured. But before I could speak, Josie stood up. A family, she said, her voice trembling. We are a family, Dad. Mom, Jesse, and me, we've been there for each other through everything. Where were you?" Steve looked stricken. "Josie, No," she interrupted. "You don't get to walk back in here and pretend nothing happened. Do you have any idea what Mom's been through? How hard she's worked to keep us together?" I reached for Josie's hand, squeezing it gently. "It's okay, sweetie." But Jesse stepped forward, his face set. "No, Mom. Josie's right. Dad needs to hear this." He turned to Steve, his voice steady. "Mom's been working 2 jobs to make ends meet. She's been to every school event, every doctor's appointment, everything. She even learned to make Grandma's beef stew from memory when you took her recipe book." I felt tears prick my eyes at the memory of that small victory. Steve looked at me, his face a mask of shame. "Laura, I had no idea. I'm so sorry." For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd once loved, but then I remembered all we'd been through, all we'd overcome. "I appreciate your apology, Steve," I said, my voice calm, "but we can't go back. We've moved forward and we're stronger for it." Steve nodded, defeat etched in every line of his face. "I understand. I hope someday you can forgive me." As he stood to leave, Jesse spoke up. "Dad, I still want you at my graduation, but not as my father. As a guest who's watching from afar, seeing what he lost." Steve's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. "Thank you, Jesse. That's more than I deserve." After he left, we sat in silence for a moment. Then Josie turned to me, her eyes shining. "Mom, I'm so proud of you. Of us." Jesse nodded, pulling us both into a hug. "We made it, didn't we?" I held my children close, feeling a wave of love and pride wash over me. Yes, we did, and we'll keep making it, every single day. Later, as we sat in the auditorium watching Jesse receive his diploma, I caught sight of Steve sitting several rows back. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw regret and longing in his gaze, but I felt no answering pull in my heart. Instead, I turned back to Josie, squeezing her hand as we cheered for Jesse. This was our family now, smaller perhaps, but stronger and more resilient than ever. As Jesse joined us after the ceremony, his face beaming with pride, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. We had weathered the storm and come out stronger on the other side. "So," Jesse said, grinning at us, "who's ready for some celebratory beef stew?" Josie and I laughed, linking arms with him as we headed out into the bright sunshine. Our future stretched before us, full of promise and hope, and I knew with absolute certainty that we were going to be just fine.